And welcome into our first episode of Craze's Corner for the week. We're talking new quarterbacks today. I'm joined with Will from Media. How we doing?
Doing good.
We got,
Doing good.
not on the list of quarterbacks to talk about because he was technically on the team last year, but JJ McCarthy coming out. Think he'll be able to replicate what Sam Darnold was doing fantasy-wise in this offense?
Yeah, and I think he gives maybe the team a little bit. Well, I don't think he puts up as much yardage. Maybe he doesn't throw as much touchdowns, but I think he probably runs for more touchdowns because he's he's younger, a little bit more mobile.
Yeah.
But on Dynasty, I own him. I would be very high on him with the tools they're putting around him.
Yeah, it's definitely fair. I like McCarthy. This has been a system where we saw Sam Darnold succeed, Kirk Cousins has succeeded, so JJ is in probably about as good a spot as you can be. But we got three teams we're going to talk about. Who one of them, they got their guy now, and that's the Giants with Russell Wilson. And then we have two others where it's maybe the guys there, and then we're assuming this is who the team's bringing in. But we'll start with the Giants and Russell Wilson. We had maybe a couple days worth of this is Jameis Winston's team, and Malik Neighbors is going to have 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns. And we were brought right back down to earth that couple days after. And now it's Russell Wilson's team. He got the guaranteed money. So for me, I think Malik Neighbors will be valuable still, but I definitely think Russ hurts Malik Neighbors' upside. I'm not really looking at Robinson or Darius Slayton to have any sort of fantasy value with Russ there. Tight ends, they could draft somebody. That's a possibility, but right now I'm not in love with their tight end room. And Russ himself as a fantasy quarterback is not exactly what I'm looking for at this point in his career. So for me, fantasy-wise, this is not great for this team. But again, Malik Neighbors will have value just because he'll be a dominant wide receiver one, which we saw, with Cortland Sutton in Denver, he had some value, and George Pickens last year in Pittsburgh, he had some value. So you agree Malik Neighbors is pretty much about it? Do you think he has like top 5 upside with Russ at quarterback or no?
My gut is that Winston plays at least 8 games, maybe 9. Now, then you have the weather at the end of the year, and the division is tougher.
Yeah.
So I think there's a chance for Malik to hit what we think he could hit. It'd be great to have him on my roster.
Yeah, he's a good guy you definitely want on your roster. Like I said, with Jameis, if Jameis plays 10-plus games, Malik Neighbors could easily set the receiving yard record. That's the player that Jameis is. He's going to ball out. He's going to make some bad plays. He's going to make some good plays. But he's a guy who will hyper-target Malik Neighbors, and I just don't think that Russell Wilson is going to bring that same juice to the offense. Another team whose quarterback's currently in question, and we're just going to kind of talk through the options and who would be best for this wide receiver core, and that's the Cleveland Browns. Right now, they just brought in Kenny Pickett. So he, based on who's on the roster right now, is the starting quarterback. The owners have come out and pretty much said that the Deshaun Watson experiment was a failure. So I doubt he plays for them. And then Kirk Cousins has been a name that's been tossed around. They're also, top 2 pick, but it's rumored that they're not going to take a quarterback with that pick. So out of those quarterback options is Kirk, who would be best for, Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman in this offense, do you think? Or do you think it's one of the other quarterbacks who can, give these wide receivers some fantasy value?
I feel it has to be Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about fantasy value to the wide receivers, it would have to be them acquiring Kirk. But even then, it's still going to be iffy, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want any of their guys as my wide receiver 1. I'm not sure I want them as a wide receiver 2.
I was going to say, I would have Jerry Jeudy as a wide receiver 2 with Kirk Cousins. I think that, Jeudy did look really good down the stretch. If this team doesn't add any wide receivers, any big-name wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy profiles to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. So if you give him Kirk Cousins, I think he can put up some numbers, but I'm not in love with if they start Kenny Pickett for most of the season. I don't think that's great for Jerry Jeudy then he's maybe a flex play depending on the matchup. And Cedric Tillman, I'd like Cedric Tillman, but I don't think he's a guy who's going to be putting up insane numbers with any of these quarterbacks. For rookie quarterback comes here, I think it's pretty much all but done. I think this is really just an unfortunate situation if you have any of these weapons in Dynasty. Maybe they draft a guy and then in a couple of years you're getting some value out of this team. But for me, I'm pretty much avoiding them unless, like I said, Cousins comes in. Then if Cousins is there, Judy, wide receiver 2, and Cedric Tillman, you can probably flex depending on the week because he did have some really big games down the stretch. And this team, I know you've had enough talking about Rodgers, but all signs are pointing towards Rodgers signing with the Steelers. So we're going to assume that he does. Do you like DK Metcalf or George Pickens? Do you think one of them can be a wide receiver 1, and you think they're both going to put up like wide receiver 2 numbers, or not even that with Rodgers?
I'm processing Rodgers to the Steelers. Mm-hmm. I don't even think that makes it 5 weeks. I like this just water and oil with the coaching staff. There's no way Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to function in Pittsburgh. I mean, even the Pittsburgh fans are calling it out, right? Like they're like, he's not our guy. He's not like us. Yeah. So, and then I don't know. Do you think he meshes well with Metcalf?
Not particularly. At this point in his career, I don't think Rodgers is the deep threat quarterback he was in Green Bay. But maybe the Steelers can do something with DK and get a little bit more out of the raw talent that he has than they did in Seattle. I know in Seattle
Kirk is a much better fit in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Play action, big wide receiver. He has his own quirky personality, but he's not Rodgers. He's not going to rock the boat with the coaching staff. Maybe I'd rather see Pittsburgh going with Kirk from a fantasy perspective, but that's just me.
Fantasy-wise, I do like Kirk in a play action, run first offense, and I think he would mesh well with DK. Pickens and DK, I think, are just going to be both wanting to have the ball in their hands the entire time, so I think it's going to be rough for whatever quarterback they bring in.
Yeah.
If it's Rodgers, which is where I'm expecting it to go at this point, the owners said, it's expected to happen. They're just waiting on Rodgers for whatever reason. Rodgers is doing whatever he's doing, holding out hope that the Vikings bring him in. I think DK can be a wide receiver 2 with Rodgers, and I think Pickens is really the one who takes a step back. He'll have his games, but it's not going to be consistent with Aaron Rodgers or even with Kirk Cousins. I don't think both are going to be consistent. And they brought in DK. They paid DK Metcalf. So those are 4 teams realistically, because we did talk about the Vikings as well, who have new quarterbacks or are going to have new quarterbacks this upcoming season, and their fantasy impacts. Hope you guys enjoyed. The next show we're doing is going to be a little bit of a draft day special. We're going to talk about some wide receiver needy teams, and if they draft guys upcoming in this draft, how does that affect their current wide receivers' values, especially if they take a guy super high, like a few of these teams have been rumored, in mock drafts. So you make sure you want to go check that show out if you haven't already. Thank you, Will, for joining me, and we'll see you in the next show.
See you next show.